As I was watching a clip of Jim Harbaugh, and I had just had this discussion with Steve Keim about a week ago, 2 weeks ago. And I said, if I was ever a GM, because he always jokes, he said, You're not a talk show host. You want to be a GM. And I'm like, I like my job, but I would love to be a GM. If I would have put 30 years into that instead of what I'm doing, who knows? You don't know. Um, but I told him, I said, I would overdraft the offensive line. And Harbaugh said this, and this is what Steve and I said. Jim put it more smartly. He said, there's only one unit in a football field that doesn't rely on any other unit, yet every other unit relies on it. And he said it's offensive line. It makes your quarterback better, your running backs better. Your tight end doesn't have to block as vigorously. Your wide receivers have more time to get downfield. It keeps your defense off the field if you have a great offensive line. And it was one of those things where when you go back to drafting Joe Alt over a wide receiver, the Bears went wide receiver and then this year had to spend a fortune on their offensive line. Instead of the Bears probably should have gone O-line instead of going with Roma Dunze. But it is interesting that the more the NFL changes and becomes an offensive league, we pay so much attention to quarterbacks. But I made this pick the other day. I think the Chiefs are going to struggle, and I don't think they're going to win their division. I don't think in this draft class there's a starting left tackle good enough in their division to block Max Crosby or Khalil Mack, or the kid number 15, Oklahoma, Bonito. And it's really interesting. I mean, right now, the 3 or 4 teams I like in the league all have great O-lines. All of them. Philadelphia, Detroit. I thought the Rams finally got their act together, offensive line. I think Buffalo's last year was better than people thought. I thought Denver's was better than people thought. I think Kansas City, I think we've just baked it in. John, they're not going 10-1 in close games next year.
Yeah, I would agree there, but their offensive line was putrid this year on the edges, and they were able to I mean, they were basically a 16-1 team. They threw the last game of the season.
Yeah.
So when it comes to coaching, when it comes to the quarterback play, and most importantly, their defense is going to be good. So like part of the reason they were winning all these games because they could win 19-17. They weren't allowing many points. That is not going to change. Now, the Chargers and the Broncos. You and I have been saying this. Anyone with common sense has been saying this. The worst their teams were going to be was last season. They're both going to be better.
Yeah.
So if either Hufanga or Greenlaw play, that defense is going to be improved. And Denver's defense was awesome. When I saw DK Metcalf ask for a trade, a lot of people that cover the NFL were like, the Chargers. It's like, guys, do you think that Jim Harbaugh is going to trade a top, 50 pick and pay a third contract to this kind of out there wide receiver, though very talented, kind of the poor man's modern day Terrell Owens type? It's different, but I mean, I think physically they have some to DK Metcalf. Are you guys nuts? And what does he do? He goes signs Mekhi Becton, and he's got a huge. I see yesterday he's got a huge smile on his face. Like, have you guys not followed Jim Harbaugh's career since Stanford? They might draft a wide receiver this year in the third round. I would expect
Right.
tight end, D lineman, running back. Like it's Najee Harris. When I was living in the Bay Area, Najee was his senior year was one of the biggest recruits in the country. I think he might have been the number one
Oh,
recruit.
he
Yeah,
was. He was
and
number
he was
one.
committed to go to Alabama, but Jim was recruiting him very hard. And I saw a clip that Jim at an Antioch, I think he went to the homecoming game, he announced their king and queen. And so, like, that's who he's. Listen, I'm not the biggest Najee star running back first round guy, but he is a solid, runs downhill, physical guy. Like, that's how Jim wants to play. Jim wants to play a lot like this version of the Chiefs. And clearly, Denver, I think Sean would like to be a little more explosive down the field, but like that division is going to be really physical. And same thing with I mean, we know how Pete Carroll, why did he butt heads with Russell Wilson? Russell wanted to throw it 50 times a game. Pete wanted to throw it about 20
Yeah.
and play D and run the ball.
Yeah.
So I think this defense is going to, or this division is going to look a lot like each other. Now, if Rashee Rice is healthy, Xavier Worthy came on. I do think the Chiefs offense could get more explosive. And I would also guess that they draft a running back. I think all these teams in this
Yes.
division could draft running backs. And if two of the
Yes.
four of them become stars, whichever ones those guys go to, like the next Jameer Gibbs or whoever, Nick Chubb, you name it, those second round running backs, hit for one of these teams could be the difference. If all of a sudden you tell me Denver has a version of Nick Chubb or Alvin Kamara on their squad, I'd be like, well, why couldn't they win 12 or 13 games? Same thing with the Chargers.
Right.
And maybe this is the year the Chiefs win. 2 years ago when they won the Super Bowl, I think they won 11 games. So the difference between
Yeah.
11 and 15 is like a couple missed field goals and a couple fumbles go your way.
Sorry to interrupt this great video, but please remember to like and subscribe. Thank you. Now back to the video. Yeah. The yeah, it's I thought Devontae Adams was obviously a great move for the Rams, but I thought Najee Harris, there were a couple of moves I loved offensively. I think Deebo Samuel to Cliff Kingsbury and Jaden is a sensational move for them at this point. He'll get tons of looks. And by the way, it will give Cliff another 12 offensive plays because Debo is such a unique player. And then I also thought, I thought Najee Harris, I'm like, remember a couple years ago when Kevin Dotson wasn't going to start for the Steelers, McVay grabs him and he literally is the highest rated guard in the league. Najee Harris with that Pittsburgh O line, everybody's like, almost a semi bust. Watch him with Harbaugh. Watch him be really effective with Harbaugh. I think of this all the time. I remember a GM telling me this years ago. He said, I used to love drafting Georgia guys when Mark Richt was there. Great recruiter, didn't squeeze all the juice out of the player. Like these guys had a lot of upside. Nick Saban squeezes every ounce of talent out of guys. And one of the things I look at, John, when these offensive coaches like McVay will go and find wide receivers, he looked at Devontae and he thought, Jet staff last year was like third tier. He's like, Devontae's going to make 80 catches for us. So I thought, yeah, I mean, so I do think when you see these offensive coaches, they find some of these defensive cultures and they find players and go, get me that.
Well, I think you look at the Eagles last year, Mekhi Becton. This year they trade for that former first round pick from the Texans. Because now, listen, you're not going to hit on them all, but the power of having good coordinators, and now so many of the offensive ones are also the head coach, but you see it a lot when the star offensive line coach or the star defensive line coach, it's like buying a cheap stock and the guy a year later turns into a $12 million player you can't afford, but you bought low, like you profited from it. And I think the best teams always have that ability. I also think the Washington Commanders with Debo and with Tunzel not as much because he would get paid no matter what. You got Debo, he's in a contract year. It's like, Debo, if you ever want to make even a 2-year, $40 million contract again, you got to slim down and give us all you got. And I think sometimes getting those guys motivated is a really big deal for these. It used to be a guy going into their third contract, probably be like 34 years old. These guys are a little younger now. They're 29, 30 years old sometimes on their third, DK Metcalf. They're not as old as, in previous generations. So sometimes these teams now with their cap space, these free agent classes, after like the first 10 names, most of them, like the average fan's like, who's that guy? You can take advantage of it with trades, overpriced guys on other teams. And Adam Peters really did that with Tunzel and Debo Samuel. Ton of cap space, but I'm not going to buy all these players and pay premiums on guys that aren't quite worth it. Like the Packers. Listen, I understand Aaron Banks has been a starter for the 49ers, but to give him that much money to be your left guard felt a little desperate to me at guard, where it's just, we have seen some questionable guard contracts in recent memory. And I understand offensive lineman, more of a plug and play. It's a lot of money to pay a guy. You might be able to find just a plug and play starter in like the third round. And the Packers historically have always been able to do it.
Yep. All right, John Middlekauff, former NFL scout. He is newly married. Now, have you guys done the honeymoon yet?
We just came home. We had work to do, Colin, and we were in Nashville. We got there on Tuesday, and most of our people got there Wednesday. So it was basically like a honeymoon and a marriage or wedding, for 5 days. I don't quite have the drinking ability that in my younger days. And so but then we get home and, obviously free agency's kicking off. She's had changed to this luxury brokerage, so she's really busy. And I realize like you go on the honeymoon necessarily to go hang out and party, just to kind of calm down. And nice, but so no, I think we're gonna go to Costa Rica. Right before, I think that last week you and I have been talking about the last couple of years. That last week of the preseason where the games are kind of over and there's nothing going on as college football. her mom had won this trip. So we're going to Costa Rica, I think, for like 6 days that last week of August, right before the NFL season. So we got a little time.
That's a great place. I've had multiple friends go
Never
there.
been.
All of them absolutely loved it. John, as always, buddy, congrats on everything in your life and way to crush
Thanks,
today.
Colin. See you, buddy.